everyone here. I suppose just talking about the census, like obviously a census is carried out every 5 years or so, and there's huge resources go into it. And the whole purpose is to plan for the future. And I think there's you have a huge amount of information, very comprehensive information, and you break it down. There obviously needs to be more done around disability and disaggregating the information there. But I don't feel that the information is used as it should be, because otherwise would we have a housing crisis? Would we have a health crisis? I mean, are these not things that should indicate that our population is increasing, that we're going to have a requirement for more housing? And I mean, when we come to housing, we have a housing crisis, but we also have a crisis ongoing for disabled people around housing within that crisis, and that's going on a lot longer than the current housing crisis as well. And I know you say that you are getting increasing demands from government departments and offices to work with them, you know, around the information. But are you being resourced to do that as well? Because obviously, if there's increasing demands, you need increased resources. And I'm just asking that. One of the criticisms of, I suppose, the last census as well would have been that there was no autistic-specific questions there. And I mean, is that something that you're going to, work on for the next census, is 2027? And in doing so, are you consulting with autistic people or the GPOs on, you know, expanding the questions around that? And I know it was mentioned here about another national disability survey, and maybe it's time for one. I think the last one was 2006, which is way predates the UNCRPT. So, I mean, I'm just wondering again if that was how you would, again, how do you identify the people to participate in that? Because that would be something that is really important. It's also the Disability Act has been mentioned here, and there's increasing calls for that to be reviewed, especially as the Epson Act is currently being reviewed, and the two should go hand in hand. So I'm just wondering again if maybe Iris or Sinead would discuss that, or members of the GPO network, and where you see that's going. Is that going to happen? An indication has come from government that there's no intention of doing that, unfortunately, but I think that needs, it's vital. And specifically with the GPO network as well, I suppose, I'm just wondering, have you any examples of meaningful consultation that either you or other DPOs are involved with any government departments or organisations? I mean, there is a document in existence, is how to conduct a disability assessment guidance for government departments. Do they use that? Because I would find again that a lot of government departments work in silos, and they don't consult enough with disabled people or their representative organisations, as in DPOs being the representative organisations. And look, I'm conscious that we have a lack of data across a huge number of areas. I mean, specifically data on gender and sexual-based violence and its impact on disabled women, in particular. Access to health screening, data on the number of prisoners we have with intellectual disability or autism. So there's a lot of areas there, you know, that we don't have very significant data that we should have in order to plan for the future and make life better for all of the people involved.
Thanks, Chair. So there's a number of issues that have been flagged there for CSO, so I'll attempt to address them as much as I can. In terms of a question or a category on autism as part of the disability question, so just looking forward, first of all, for the Census 2027 public consultation, there has been a number of submissions made both about autism and wheelchair use. So again, I can't preempt what's going to happen there. It's not a CSO decision, it's a decision of the Census Advisory Group, but those questions, those proposals have been received as part of the consultation, so they will be discussed by the Census Advisory Group. If there is a disability subgroup proposed, as I said, I would expect that both of those submissions will be discussed by the subject matter experts to come to a recommendation to put to the plenary Census Advisory Group. The autism question in particular was discussed in previous census consultations, and I think in particular consideration was given to creating specific categories for both autistic spectrum disorder and Down syndrome. But the Census Advisory Group for previous censuses didn't consider it feasible to list individual disabilities on the census form, and instead the broader categories of an intellectual disability and a difficulty with learning, remembering and concentrating work created. But again, as I said, they will be discussed as part of the upcoming Census Advisory Group. In terms of the disability survey, so I mean, CSO is happy to engage with all users and stakeholders, including on this issue. Any decision will be subject to the usual issues such as constraints around resourcing and funding. We'd be happy to take formal submissions or engagement from users on that and engage with them and go through the process of making a decision. In terms of the actual questions in the census form and who they capture, so as I said, CSO doesn't have really a principled adherence to the questions as framed. I would expect that if there was change proposed to the questions, there would be some resistance from other user groups in this space based on the experience of the consultation for the last census. That's not to say they won't change. I would caution, though, that the census questions have to be understandable and comprehensible to the entire population, and putting in overly complex framing of questions will make the data suffer. So that has to be borne in mind, particularly by the CSO when questions are proposed for inclusion on the census. But can they be changed? Absolutely, they can be changed with the agreement to the greatest extent possible of all the users in this space. In terms of the accessibility of previous census data, so the CSO recognises the importance of ensuring that our website is accessible to everyone, and we are committed to making our web content available to the widest possible audience, including those who use assistive technologies. We are focused on improving website user experience for everyone, and we welcome feedback on accessibility and all aspects of our websites. We're currently working to update aspects of our website to improve content accessibility for everyone who visits it. This includes both technical updates to the website as well as policy updates to ensure the content we publish is optimised for universal access. So I think in terms of Deputy Tully's comments on the use of the data, so I think CSO's role in this regard is to make the data as accessible and available as possible. In terms of outside organisations using it, I suppose there's only so far as the CSO can go in terms of other organisations using it, but we try to make it as accessible and push it to the greatest extent that we can in terms of awareness. And resourcing, I think that might be one to use the horrible phrase that we get back to you on. I don't know that we can answer it here today.
I suppose in terms of kind of overarching remarks, IREC would be very clear that there needs to be a use of the human rights model of disability in terms of all data, and it's important to kind of clarify that although some data sets, for example health data sets, may seem more aligned to a medical model of disability, all data sets can be developed on the basis of a human rights model of disability, and there's a real wealth of guidance around data collection, use, indicator sets, etc., which are aligned to the human rights model of disability. We benefit from the fact that the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights prepared a report for the Human Rights Council last year in their spring session, and I'd encourage the committee to consider the 5 areas of data that is discussed in that paper, and I'll provide the full paper to the committee afterwards. So of course they do talk about census and household surveys, but they do talk about disability-specific surveys. So although the IREC will very much focus on disaggregation of data, there is a need for aggregated data, and we would fully support national disability-specific surveys, and as you pointed out, it's overdue and timely to do that. There's also a resource in administrative data. And also, I mean, building on the previous question, disability determination and assessment data as well, and then participation in citizen-generated community-based data collection. So those are the 5 areas that the UN would advise signatories, states that have ratified CRPD to consider when they're talking about disability data. In terms of use of data, we also benefit, as the Chief Commissioner mentioned, to the work of the EU's equality data subgroup. There's general equality data guidelines, and they do include looking at how do we build the use of data, and some of that is at the level of greater operational collaboration between institutions, but also, very importantly, I think particularly in terms of disabled people who have had many negative experiences of highly sensitive data being misused, misrepresented and shared without their permission and not deleted in accordance with their requirements. The need to build trust and to work closely with disabled people And again, as the Chief Commissioner has pointed out, CRPD is extremely unusual to have a whole article on statistics and data, and I really feel there's a huge opportunity not only for disabled people in Ireland but across the equality groups to use that as a way of framing human rights and equality compliant data. And there's again a great deal of guidance there around intersectionality in data, working with affected groups or identity groups to develop the data. But I would draw the committee's attention to the fact that specifically with CRPD there's a requirement on the state to involve disabled people in the development of data, the collection of data, the use of data at all stages of data, but also to make data available, accessible, usable by them. So I think there's a huge opportunity under CRPD Article 31, and I really, as the Chief Commissioner said, really welcome the committee's focus on it, because we do see this in IREC, not only in our role as the independent monitoring mechanism, but as a national equality body across all equality groups. We really feel that this is a route to improve disaggregated data in the state. As has been referred to by the previous speaker, Article 31 is interpreted across all of the articles in CRPD, so it's every economic, social, cultural, civil and political right that we need to consider when we're talking about data, and so there's clearly a huge number of players in the field. But building on this issue as well around how do disabled people understand their rights under CRPD, interpret them and advise and engage with state actors. There's also an article on awareness raising, and that has been very poorly implemented so far, and there's a whole body of work that needs to be done around awareness raising, around statistics and data, so that disabled people can fully participate in the implementation of it. I mean, similarly as well, there is evolving definitions of disability. The CRPD quite deliberately doesn't provide a definition of disability, and given those 5 groups of types of data, there will be issues around definitions, thresholds, entitlements, etc. And that is why it's very important to involve disabled people at all stages in terms of data sets being collected. The paper to the UN is also clear we need to think about individual level data, which talks to entitlements, but it's also about social barrier data as well. So we need to kind of hold both of those complexities. Welcome your question on the Disability Act and is it time to be reviewed? We are in this situation, as the Commission has repeatedly advised members of the Oireachtas and government about a lot of disability-relevant core disability legislation predates CRPD, and the Commission has a real strong priority on CRPD-compliant legislation. We are about to make our submission on the EPSIN review, which is due on the 3rd of next month, but at the same time we make that point that the Disability Act has got to be reviewed to bring it in compliance with CRPD, but also because there is a clear relationship between the Disability Act assessments and the EPSIN assessments. But I would also draw attention to the need for CRPD compliance and data considerations around legislation that particularly affects people with mental health issues, psychosocial disabilities. So we also need to talk about the Mental Health Act and would encourage at the opportunity, I suppose, as the current legislation is passing through the Oireachtas, to think about CRPD compliance and equality data in that context as well.
Thank you. I mean, following on from many of the points which are very helpful from IREC, we really think that it's so important that we think, and I know we're speaking just around CSO responsibility today largely, but also there's a vast amount of research going on throughout this country, especially in the university sector. Every single university in this country, part of its status and standing and credibility is based on their research work and the funding they can attract. And so I really would love to see that the committee would look to call for disability proofing of any funding that is afforded to any research institutions to ensure that it is of high integrity, that it reflects the human rights model of disability, particularly when it comes to any research related to disability, because there's an awful lot of work being carried out, and sometimes have to question the basis and the foundation upon which some of this work is being carried out, even whether or not they involve disabled people in the research. In the whole health and social care area, there's a lot more work happening around what's known as PPI initiatives, so that's public patient partner initiatives, and that is a model that can be replicated right throughout the country in other research and higher level institutions, and I've been including the medical research institutions as well, and the HRB, for example, the Health Research Board. So, disability permeates the entirety of our lives. We're not just neatly boxed off into little areas. So that's something we'd like to highlight and bring to the attention of the committee for your own report when you're drafting it. Thank you.